Hi, it's Alan here with another evidence number 45 of 1,000 evidences for the LDS Church. Today we're going to be talking about whether or not Joseph Smith was a womanizer. There's a lot of people out there that say he was, including fellow Latter-day Saints that believed these stories about him. We can understand why people would assume that he was not morally right with women. This is understandable because if people made assumptions then, we can understand why people make assumptions today. I don't know how he might have had time to chase women when he was being persecuted. He sometimes had to run for his life. He was tormented. He had a church to conduct. He had political involvement. He was mayor of Nauvoo. And he had many responsibilities. And then for people to say, well, he was jumping from bed to bed. Oh, my goodness. In those days, there was no TV, no movies, no computers, and so people depended on books, pamphlets, and speakers that would go around giving sensational accounts of various things. And one very common subject was Mormonism, spelled with an M, and how evil it was and how terrible the prophet was. And again, with the big lie, if you repeat something often enough, loud enough, it starts to be accepted as truth. It sold papers, all right. If they said this woman spent the night under the same roof as Joseph Smith, okay, they don't come right out and say that they did anything, but you can tell by that evasive generalization, the people who have preconceived notions will read into that, oh yeah, we know what he did under the same roof. There's another account of a woman spending the night in Joseph Smith's bed. Okay, well, there you go. Little do they realize that was Jane Manning, who did sleep in Joseph Smith's bed, but Joseph and Emma slept in another room on the floor. And I think they did this to honor this lady. She had been a slave. She and a small group of saints that had come to believe in the church walked hundreds of miles and in the cold, barefoot. And I don't think he was trying to do that kindness because he felt sorry for her having been a slave and probably discriminated against. I think he did it to honor her sacrifice, her testimony, her willing to give so much. But then we have the people who are have a corrupt mind who say, look at that. This Jane Manning spent the night in Joseph Smith's bed. And so you have all kinds of sensational, inflammatory stories, so much so that after Joseph Smith chose his 12 apostles, great men, brilliant men, they started hearing these stories, and 8 of them left the church. So we can't be too terribly surprised in our day when people hear these nasty stories about Joseph Smith and they leave the church. Now, the rest of the story is that many of them came back, at least 4 of them came back with egg on their face and realized that they had swallowed these rumors, hook, line, and sinker. Some of them who left and came back were not apostles, of course. There were other members. One in particular was the poet, William W. Phelps, who was so angry at Joseph Smith for the nasty things that he thought Joseph Smith did, that he testified against Joseph Smith in court, in the very court that sent him to the Liberty Jail. And it was terrible. The jail was cold, and it was damp, and it was dark, and it was miserable. And Joseph Smith, we have communications where he sent word to Emma, if you could find a blanket for me, it would be so nice. And after he was freed from this prison, this same William W. Phelps, whose hymns are in our hymn book, he sent a letter to Joseph Smith, and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I found out that I believed lies. I believed in these terrible stories, and I don't deserve for you to forgive me or to let me be one of the saints. He says, I don't blame you, but I would like to ask for your forgiveness. And Joseph, he wrote back to Brother Phelps, and he said, come, dear brother, the battle is past. Friends at first are friends at last. And after all that Joseph Smith had been through, he forgave and embraced this wayward member that came back to the fold. And right here I would advise any of you that have strayed away to realize that you've been victims of lies, terrible stories. Now, there was a lady that left the church. I wrote a book about it recently, and she left the church, and she's one of the main reasons I left the LDS church was because Joseph Smith was a womanizer, and he was chasing women, and she said particularly the thing that disturbs me most was his attempt to seduce Jane Law, wife of William Law. William Law was one of his counselors of Joseph Smith. And so this Jane Law, she accused Joseph Smith of trying to seduce him. Now, Joseph Smith had bodyguards. He had people who took notes on everything he said and did. And he had men around him for the very purpose of verifying what he did and said so that they could witness any charges made against him. And I don't know that they were very close in proximity to Joseph Smith when he was called over by this Jane Law and said, Brother Joseph, I need to speak to you. And she said, I would like you to seal me to my husband. And he said, well, words to the effect, Brother William is not ready. He has some things that need to be taken care of. And she said, well, if you won't seal me to him, seal me to you. And he said, well, I'm not prepared to do that. And she said, well, if you don't, she might have said, if you don't, then I'm going to make trouble for you. In fact, when she tried to embrace him, he kind of put up his hand to try to dissuade her. So sometime later, she went home to her husband, William, and said, Joseph Smith made an attempt on me to seduce me. And William is reported to have said, well, next time I see Joseph Smith, I'm going to kill him for doing that. Well, long story short, it turns out that she made it up. Later, this William Law had written in his diary that Joseph Smith had made an attempt on his wife. He said, on my wife, Jane. But sometime later it was crossed out, obviously crossed out by William himself when he realized that it was all fabrication. They visited the son of William and Jane, He was not LDS. He was a judge, and he made a statement that this was a fabrication. It was a lie. There's no truth to it. Joseph Smith did not try to subdue my mother. So one of the conclusions we can reach on this is that if people are willing to kill Joseph Smith, and some of them were anxious to do so, and some people did kill him, they would not hesitate to assassinate his character. Now, we need to look at some of the things that did go on with Joseph Smith and some of these women. We know that some of the women that were sealed to Joseph Smith, some people say, he had 30 or 40 wives. No, let's take a look at this. Some of the women that were sealed to him were sealed as daughters and not as wives. There was a principle at the time called the principle of adoption. This is according to a source from Archibald Bennett, line upon line, the law of adoption, one phase of development in the Mormon concept of salvation, 1830 to 1900. This is from an article in BYU Studies, number 14, volume 14, number 3, page 291 to 314. In other words, what I'm saying is some women were sealed to him as daughters, not as wives. Some men were sealed to Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith was not gay. They were sealed as sons. Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, some of the other leaders, people wanted to be sealed to them to help ensure their salvation, not as spouses, but as part of the family. Another explanation is that some of the women were sealed to him for the eternities only, and not for this life. Another type of marriage was a dynastic marriage, which means that it was not consummated. Another reason there were a number of women that were sealed to him as wives were post-mortem, after he died. And so we get critics that summarize all of these things and categorize them as one big problem. We also find out that there were some generalizations made about Joseph Smith and his affairs with young women. Some people point to Fanny Alger. They say, she was 14. No, she was 18. We appreciate the research done by Brian Hales and his person that worked with him, Don Bradley, who has done some fantastic investigations into finding the real truth behind some of these allegations and these stories. But the bottom line is that he was a good, virtuous man. One final note is that people, including Fawn Brody, who wrote No Man Knows My History, she made the charge that there are a number of young men that were fathered by Joseph Smith. And she has pictures in her book of those whom she suspects as being biological sons of Joseph Smith, indicating that there is a similarity to Joseph Smith. So there has been DNA studies made to either prove or disprove. And the bottom line here is that none of Joseph Smith's DNA has been found in anyone suspected of being a biological son of Joseph Smith. Here again, the evidence demonstrates that Joseph Smith was a good, virtuous man. He was true to Emma. We don't know that there's any improprieties. Everything was above board. Yes, the rumors went crazy. People left the church. Many of them came back when they realized that they were victims who had swallowed everything hook, line, and sinker. Let's not be like them. Let's be smart about this. Let's see the fruits. The fruits of Joseph Smith were wonderful. The things that he accomplished and the miracles that he performed. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with evidence number 46.